Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 244 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today, I want to look at Psalm 137. Now, in this psalm, this is speaking of the people who are in exile in Babylon. Let me just start off with 137, verse 1. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, when we remembered Zion. Upon the willows in the midst we hung our harps. For our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Think of the sorrow that the people were in. Here they are, exiled in Babylon, and I want to read just a few lines out of a commentary speaking of the sorrows which the people were bearing. It says, they wept over their loved ones. Think of the many people who had died at the hands of the Babylonians in the land. Not just in the city of Jerusalem itself, but in the surrounding areas. So many had fallen in battle or just at the slaughter of the Babylonians. And we're going to see at the end of this just short psalm how it's going to speak of the Babylonians having killed the babies, and it's going to say that the Medes and the Persians will basically do the same thing to their children. And that was the ruthlessness of the Babylonians. Keep in mind that you can never expect, and I say this in thinking of modern warfare or battles, or even just people just in the crimes that they commit around us, you can never expect a non-believer to act as a believer. And that's why we must realize that the people in the world, when they do these atrocities, some would say, well, how can they do this? Well, they do this because they don't know the Messiah. They don't know the Lord. And that's why people act as horribly as they do. Now, it's bad enough when a believer, a follower of Christ, sins, and I'm going to get to that in just a little bit, but it's bad enough when that happens, but imagine what it was like at the hands of the Babylonians. So they also were weeping and mourning over the loss of all of their possessions, everything that they had owned. It wasn't just their homes that were destroyed and their possessions in their home. They lost their fields, they lost their fruit trees, they lost all their livestock. Everything was gone. Then they had been forced to march from their homeland to this foreign land. Forced to march on threat of death. If they did not do so, then they would have been put to death along the journey. They also are now in a land that's not their own. They're really as slaves, or rather prisoners. So they don't have freedom. They can't come and go as they would like. We know that Jeremiah does tell the people to build houses, make their homes there, because they're going to be there for 70 years. But did the average person know that it was going to be 70 years? When Daniel, reading the writings of Jeremiah, sees 70 years, he pauses and he's calculating. We kind of get this picture at least. He's calculating how old he was when he was forcibly removed from Jerusalem, how many years he's now been in Babylon, and he's thinking the return's pretty soon, because Jeremiah said it's going to be 70 years. But I don't think that the average person knew of the 70 years. So to them, the future seemed rather bleak. But if you were even in your 30s at that time and you are like, well, we're going to be here for 70 years, I'm never going to see home again. And then they're weeping over the destruction of not only the city of Jerusalem, but the destruction of the temple itself. Here was their center for worship. Now, I know they've been taken away as captors because they weren't worshiping the Lord, but they were even going there to worship. Now they realize, though, the reality of God beyond anything they had ever understood before. And I think that some of them are starting to realize that God said, well, you want to worship these false gods? You want to worship these demon idols? Then I'm going to take you to a land that is full of them. And here you go. You're now in this land where at the threat of death, you will be told that you have to worship these false gods like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But they're starting to also see the power of God in the same sense that how the Lord protected those three young men. So imagine now as the reality begins to sink in, how can they sing their glorious songs of Zion? How will they do that? So they've lost their freedom. They lost all their possessions. They're in this strange land, and their captors are now saying, hey, sing us one of those songs of your strange religion. That's in a sense what's happening. Well, let me read this last part here. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. Now remember who these Edomites are. They're the descendants of Esau. So the Edomites, they're basically saying for their distant relatives, hey, we want to see them wiped off the face of the earth. Now, how's that turned out for the Edomites today? How many Edomites do you know? I don't think you know any, do you? They are gone. But for the Jewish population, the Lord preserved them, restored them to their land. And now I do want to back up and say it's not a full, complete restoration yet. That's some of what I was talking about yesterday. So if you didn't see yesterday's, I know it's a short video. I apologize for that. It definitely needed a longer time to address a part of what's happening in the Valley of Dry Bones. But the gist of it was that the Lord will restore his people and the land. But I said, we see that happening, but it's not to fulfillment yet. That comes at the millennial reign of Christ, when he will sit on the throne of David physically. He's on the throne of David now spiritually, but he will sit physically on the throne of David in the time to come. So it doesn't turn out too well for the Edomites, does it? And then in verse 8, O daughter of Babylon, you devastated one, how blessed will be the one who repays you with the recompense with which you have repaid us. How blessed will be the one who seizes and dashes your little ones against the rock. I know that's very gruesome, but that's exactly what the Babylonians had done to the Hebrew children. To those who weren't able to be on the forced march, they killed them. Again, as I say, you cannot expect a non-believer to act as a believer. You can't do that. These people were ruthless. Yes, the Lord allowed them to be ruthless, because you also have to realize the Hebrews had turned away from the Lord. They were worshiping Ashtoreth. They were worshiping Baal. They were worshiping Moloch. And in Ashtoreth is a very sexual, prostitution level type worship that resulted in a lot of children being born out of that sexual orgies that would take place, and then they would offer those children up in the fire to Moloch or to Baal. And that is just loosely a part of the picture, but this is what disgusted the Lord. And as I've said in times past, I just want to readdress it here. People will say, well, why would the Lord allow that to happen? But then when the Lord judges the people, then people would say again, well, I don't understand that. Well, you wanted the Lord to stop it, and so he stopped it. And as I've said before, when the Hebrews do return to the land after their 70 years of exile, never again would the people as a nation worship those false gods. So we're going to see a lot of this unfold. It's the Medes and the Persians who will devastate and destroy Babylon, and it's the Medes and the Persians who will even set the captors free. It's the Medes and the Persians who will in part pay for not only the walls of the city to be rebuilt, but even give money for the temple itself to be rebuilt. So it's interesting to see how the Lord uses that enemy of the Babylonians to be the ones to help rebuild his kingdom. Not that they were God-fearing people themselves, but he will use them to do that. Well, brothers and sisters, I do hope and pray that you're having a good day. Until tomorrow, God bless.